Today on Hands-On Photography, we're going to take a look at another piece of our macro photography tutorial just to finish it up with some fine, sharp focus points. All right, we're going to talk focus stacking. Stay tuned. Hands-On Photography is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Using the same password everywhere is a security nightmare waiting to happen. LastPass easily creates unique passwords for every site. Visit lastpass.com/twit.
This is TWiT.
This episode of Hands-On Photography is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Get your unlimited wireless plan for just $30 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free. Go to mintmobile.com/hop. Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am at Pruitt, and this is Hands-On Photography here on TWiT TV. I hope y'all are doing well. I am unbelievable as always. This is the podcast where I like to sit down and share with you different tips and tricks that are going to help make you a better photographer as well as a better post-processor, which is what we're going to get into today. A little bit of post-processing. If this is your first time catching the show, I want to say welcome to you and thank you for joining us this week. Now, while you're here, go ahead and hit the subscribe option in whatever podcast app you're listening to. And if you're not listening on a podcast app and you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. But if you're not sure how to find us, you can quite simply just go to our website, twit.tv/hop. That's twit.tv/HOP for Hands-On Photography. You'll see all of our subscription options right there. Good old RSS for your podcast apps, or YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that good stuff. We're all over the things. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get started with this week's episode. Now, previously, last week in particular, episode 48, we did our macro photography lab, which is basically a two-part series here. I gave you the introduction, and then I walked you through actually shooting some macro photography shots. But at the end of episode 48, I teased that sometimes there's going to be some things in focus that you want to be in focus in that particular shot, because when you're shooting macro photography, your depth of field and focal plane changes. So there's a lot of times it's going to be hard to get everything in focus that you want to be in focus. But there's a trick to solve that problem, and it's called focus stacking. And now there are a bunch of different apps and programs that are out there that will really just lock in and dial in on focus stacking because that's all that they do. Or you can be like me and just use whatever you have. And in this case, it's the good old world of Photoshop, and use Photoshop's tools to just mask everything together using good old layer mask. And it's not hard to do. It's just we'll talk about using layer mask as we've done on previous episodes here on the network, and you'll see the difference. Things are going to be in focus that should be in focus that normally wouldn't be in focus because of the changed depth of field from shooting macro photography. Now, before we get into this week's examples, I want to take a few moments to thank this week's fine sponsor, the fine folks at Mint Mobile. This episode of Hands-On Photography is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Breaking up with your old wireless provider just got a whole lot easier thanks to Mint Mobile. They were the first company to sell premium wireless service online only, and now Mint Mobile is introducing their unlimited data plan for just $30 a month. Now let that sink in. An unlimited plan for $30 a month. I jumped on Mint Mobile sometime last year, and I haven't looked back. To get your new unlimited wireless plan for just $30 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/hop. That's mintmobile.com/hop. Cut your unlimited wireless bills to $30 a month at mintmobile.com/hop. So now let's go ahead and hop on over into my computer screen here, particularly this time Lightroom, just so we can give you a bit of an illustration of what we've been talking about. So let's go ahead and hit this button here, and boom, you should see on my screen the images that we shot last week, the good old succulent that Queen Pruitt has all over this home that we live in. Good Lord, there's a lot of these things all over the place. But let's take a closer look at it. We have, this is a macro shot. Everything is filling up the frame as far as the subject matter goes, and there's lots and lots of detail. But as you zoom in on here, if you look at this right portion of the frame, and I'm zoomed in, things are not particularly in focus, even though I shot this at an f11 aperture, as shown right here in the upper right of Lightroom. So I pull over here towards the middle of the frame, and you see there's a lot more detail, and everything is crispy, sharp, and in focus. Now, again, f11, if we go back to, say, episode 3 of Hands-On Photography, I talked about how you can change your aperture to make things in focus and change the depth of field, particularly if your aperture on your lens is wide open, say like at f2.8 or f4 or what have you. You're going to get a shallow depth of field, meaning everything behind your subject will start to fade away and just start to blur. It'll be a tasteful blur, and leaving your subject in focus, nice and crispy, and separates them from the background. And when you change that aperture to a larger f number, or actually a smaller aperture, to say like f10, f11, that aperture blade is going to start to close down. It's going to minimize the amount of light that's coming in through the lens, and it's going to allow everything to be more so in focus. The depth of field is not going to be as shallow. It's going to really broaden out, so things behind you will look a little bit more in focus to your subject versus using something with the shallow depth of field. So here, using f11, I had to do that because it was hard to get everything in focus on such a small subject matter there. And f11 gave me a little bit of leeway, but you can still see that it didn't quite hit the mark for everything. But that's okay. We can fix that just by taking our images and doing a bit of focus stacking. So let me see if I can show you here. We'll pull this menu up here at the bottom of Lightroom. And this is image 1, and then this is image 2. And I didn't do anything as far as moving the subject around or anything like that. I just changed where the camera was going to focus. So if you look here on the right side of the image, that particular petal or I guess it's a petal. it's more so in focus versus on the first image, even though this is the exact same image, exact same subject, but we got it more so in focus. So now what we can do is just blend these things together to make them work for us and put things a little more in focus across the whole subject matter. And to do that, we're just going to pull these into Photoshop and use the trusty layer mask tool. Now, we talked about layer mask in episode 12. Mr. Victor and I actually wore some masks that day. It was a pretty fun episode. Man, I really, really miss being in the studio with you, Mr. Victor. Dang it. But anyway, let's go ahead and pull this up into Photoshop. So I'm just going to select both of these images here at the bottom, and then I'm going to right click and say edit in Photoshop as layers. Photoshop's going to open, and it's going to bring them in one at a time. And there we go. So now both of the layers are now inside of Photoshop. I could go through and do all of my standard sharpening and things like that, but I'm not going to get into that right now. We're just going to focus more on the focus. So let me move this menu out of the way here. So let's just push that over there like that. So layer 1, layer 2, or layer 1 is on the bottom, layer 2 is on the top. So I'm going to start by firing up layer 1 here on the bottom, and I know that I'm going to need to get this middle portion, the piece in the middle and in the rear, I need to get that more so in focus, because when I put layer 2 up, you see that's the piece that's actually sharp. So first things is first, let's go ahead and try to do a bit of an alignment just to be safe. You don't necessarily have to, because you use the tripod, and hopefully your tripod was steady and still, and you didn't use an El Cheapo tripod like I suggested last time. Not using an El Cheapo tripod, but we're going to just do an alignment anyway, just for kicks and giggles. Auto align, click OK. There we go. It's done. So now we're going to add our layer mask. So inside of Photoshop or whatever photography manipulation app that you're using, there's other options out there that have masking capabilities. Here at the bottom, you have the layer mask icon. Just click that once. Okay. So now we see the top has the middle piece in focus. The bottom one had this right piece in focus. So we're going to click our B on our keyboard for the brush tool. And over here on the left side of Photoshop, there's the color palette, and you want to use black to add your layer mask, okay? Because when you paint black on top of a layer mask, it's going to show everything that's under the layer that you're working on. So let's just use a nice soft brush. We have our hardness set to 0 now. And then I like to make the flow roughly 4 or 5%. But on this case, I could probably crank it up a little bit more because I don't necessarily have to use some sensitivity, because this is just a fine piece of plants or whatever. This isn't someone's skin. So we can just crank this up a little bit more. We don't necessarily have to be as careful. So I'm going to brush in the texture there, just like so. And now this is a lot more in focus than just using the rear piece being in focus. Okay, so now let me do this again. I'm going to erase all of this. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in on it this time so you can really see the difference. So let's zoom in a little bit closer. Okay, change this brush to be a little bit smaller. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So now we're going to brush in that bottom layer that has this particular piece in focus, and you'll see all of the details starts to come back like that. And again, layer masks are super duper useful for a lot of different things, particularly just revealing things that are on the underlying layer of what you're working on. And that could be for stuff like texture, that could be for colors, it could be for shapes, it could be used for compositing, like what we've talked about in our compositing quarantine photography idea, where we just cloned in an extra ant Pruitt into the scene. Yeah, it's very, very useful, very, very quick and easy to do. There. Now, see, that looks so much better. So let's do a bit of a before and after. So let's see, we'll make a layer here. We'll say a duplicate just so you can see a before and after like that. I'm going to push that up there. And then I'm going to select this, make it a group. All right, so now what you see here, this is the before, where only this front piece is in focus and the rear isn't. And if I do an after, everything is in focus. Big, big difference. Again, that's before. And there's the after. All right. Yeah. Pretty easy to do. Just good old focus stacking. Basically, when you're doing your macro photography, if you're using a tripod that's nice and steady, you can change your focal point of your subject. Just barely move it. If you need to move it a centimeter or two to the right, do so gently, easily. Lock in the focus, snap the shot, and then move it to another spot. If you need to, lock in the focus, snap the shot. Then you take all of those images that you've grabbed and just compile them all together into Photoshop and just composite it and use the layer mask tool. And you'll have a beautiful high resolution macro shot with pretty much everything in focus based on how you set it up. Very, very easy to do. All right. So that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you all so much for the continued support of Hands-On Photography and support of me. It does mean a lot. Again, if you have any questions and feedback that you'd like to add to me, so shoot me an email at hop@twit.tv. That's hop@twit.tv if you'd like to email pictures that you've snapped, image critique requests, just general questions or feedback. I'm totally open for all of that. Or you can just give me a follow over on Instagram and Twitter. On Instagram, I am ant_Pruitt. And it's also the same over on Twitter, ant_Pruitt. All right. That's going to do it for this week, folks. Thank you again for the support. Thank you again to my man, Mr. Victor, for making me look and sound good with all of this beautiful editing and post-processing. I will catch you all next week here on Hands-On Photography. So now you all safely, because this is still COVID-19 times, create and dominate. And yes, I am still looking for justice for Breonna Taylor. Y'all take care.
Want more TWiT? Well, you gotta check out iOS Today. That's the show where Leo Laporte and I cover everything you need to know about iOS. It's the best apps, the best games, and everything you can do with your iPad, your iPhone, and your Apple Watch, plus CarKit and so much more. twit.tv/iOS.